Hello, everybody. Hello. Um, this week was a fun one. Well, it should have been fun. It should have been funner. Yeah, let's go with that. It should have been more fun than it was. Let's keep changing it. This week was Trafalgar. Trafalgar. I think I've been saying that wrong in my head the whole time. Trafalgar by Nicholas Best. Now, I don't know where I first heard about this particular story. The story is of Lord Nelson of Britain taking out Napoleon's fleet at Trafalgar. I don't know where I first heard this story, but I've always wanted to read like a full-on book about it, right? About it particularly. This isn't the go-to. This is not the go-to book for this. But this is why I picked it up. I'm still in the trial phase of our Kindle Unlimited, so I don't own this book, but I've borrowed it off of the Kindle Unlimited situation. Uh, I gave it a 2 out of 5. It's kind of a hot mess. Now, what you have with the 1800s is a jack ton of stuff that happens, but they're all interesting, right? And then so what you end up with as, I guess, a historian is losing focus, let's say, right? And he does this not good. Others do it really well. He's not of the really well class. He just loses focus. And it's hard to do. I would imagine I've never written a history. You research all this stuff. There's all these interesting things that happen, but you gotta not talk about certain interesting things, and it gets difficult. Part of me also thinks they hurry, right? They rush themselves. Obviously, you're writing for a job. You want the money. So they rush themselves, and then you try and get things in that will move the product, I guess, so to speak, as opposed to writing a history for the sake of history. Completely different thing. I'm reading another one, another history. It's super long. I haven't finished it yet, but it you can write in such a way where those things aren't a consideration, and I think you would get a better history of it. In any case, let's get into what this one talks about and see if I don't get sidetracked too much. We start with Napoleon. Like this character. Very fun character, very original character. Now, Napoleon's extremely interesting. I'm going to admit, in school, I didn't get a whole lot of Napoleon talk, which there should be. There should be a lot more discussion about Napoleon. There's too many roads intersect with this person. It affected world history. In any case, I think this is why our author starts with him. He's a big, interesting character. But I will tell you right now, you could have read the whole book. If you read the whole book and skip all the Napoleon bits, you won't miss anything. Right? Because this happened out at sea. And Napoleon is not a mariner in any regard. He completely owns the land, but he does not know anything about the ocean, which is a problem for him trying to get this done. He's conquering right now. The book doesn't cover this. I know this coming in, which is another problem. If you bring something in, you have to lay the groundwork for the reader. They might not know. And let's say it's something very well known. You got to write it in an original enough way that I won't be annoyed retreading already known facts. Right? He doesn't seem to do this. And it comes into effect throughout. In my mind, when I've heard of Trafalgar first, for whatever reason, I just thought it was, right, we got Spain right here, right? And old Britain land. And Africa. I always thought it was just up here. For whatever reason, in my head, it's like Napoleon versus England. I just think of the two land masses as the characters, and then they're fighting like this. It doesn't occur to me initially to think that they're all over the globe, this kind of situation, which they were. But that's how it goes in my head. But in actuality, it's under here, right? That part of Spain, way away, a long way from England. So he'll use things like Trafalgar, Gibraltar, Cadiz, Dover, Southampton, whatever the place is. Like, I should know where those places are, but I don't know where those places are. I don't know anything about them, right? Or if I do, I might be wrong. The poor reader might be wrong in their assumptions. I might think Cadiz is like right in the middle and it's on the coast. You know, I might think that the white shores of Dover are on the top and not the bottom, facing Norway or whatever. So, for the reader's benefit, you should be explaining these things if you're going to bring them up because it affects the story. Even if, right, it didn't affect the people and say in their day to day, it affected how long it took them to move, supplies, all this sort of unwritten stuff. You have to bring that in, right? But he doesn't. So we start with a character we don't need, and then we don't explain it well enough for the reader. That's not a good start. Mind you, I'm going to assume a lot of the history is, let's say, correct for the most part. Now, I haven't done it for the channel yet, but I have a big, long, highly excellent biography of Napoleon, right? And so in it, and the same with this other one I'm reading, they break down other histories that were written in the time and then dissect them. So, let's say, for example, a William Manchester is going to write a biography of Winston Churchill. He gets Winston Churchill's book and then reads it, but then fact checks the Winston Churchill. Yes, these are Winston Churchill's words. He wrote them himself. But then he'll be like, yeah, he wrote this, but he got these days wrong. And then as the biographer, he makes some kind of an assumption, some thought from his research knowledge as to what that means. Does it mean anything? Right? Because some will be like, he was pompous, so he probably said this to make himself look better. Right? Or he was a nice guy, so that was just probably an honest mistake. You have to do that for me because I'm not there. And I haven't done the research. I'm just a reader. I'm just here to get what you've given me. Your job as the author, as a biographer, as a historian, is to do that research, to present me with a thing, right? He loses track of this. So he'll grab little things that were written in the time, in whatever the 1800s, but he won't fact check those things. So we had newspapers running rampant in the 1800s. They were at war with Napoleon. And of course, we have animosity. So the writers of that time, for money, for politics, for any number of reasons, may have written things with a skew and a slant. To say Napoleon tripped where he never tripped. To say he was full of himself where he's not. These kind of things, right? Well, those things then get passed down through history. That doesn't make them actually history. It makes them rumor that's sort of metastasizing, so to speak. Our guy I don't feel like he's filtering those out well enough. I feel certain amounts of the sort of Napoleon hate from Britain to come through because those are more easily accessible materials to get a hold of and read, right? So for French histories, you might need to learn French. For Spanish history, and it gets difficult, obviously, even to find translations. So I feel like I get a lot of this in the Napoleon sections as well. So I'm going to assume some of that's even on the British side. So you got to take it for for what that is. So Napoleon's sitting there, and he can stare with the telescope at the White Cliffs of Dover. That's where he's trying to get. The essential setup is you can't beat him on land. He has 100,000 men. He's a tactical genius. If he can get those guys to England, game over, lights out. Right? The problem is you can't beat England in the water. Right? But there's about 90 miles I think at the closest. That's how wide the English Channel is. Not long. But it is water, and you can't swim a bunch of soldiers across. Got to get them across somehow. Never able to do it because of this battle. Right? He's never able to do it, which when I was reading it got me thinking. I got to put some respect on Julius Caesar's name because he was able to cross this English Channel and defeat the English. Hitler couldn't do it. Napoleon Bonaparte couldn't do it. But Julius Caesar got it done. And I'm like, you could say all this about technology, blah, blah, blah. Fact of the matter is, man put a W on the board. All right, we got to respect that. Again, not in the book. I was just thinking it in my head. I do got to find a book on Julius Caesar. But I'm thinking I got to read the history of Rome first. Then get into sort of individual. But that's for later. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab sort of interesting facts that happen along the way. Because that's how I sort of was taking this book. Because it comes so piecemeal. It's not like a story, like my Lyndon Johnson book. It is history, but it's such a story. This one's not so much a story as sort of facts. But his army's sitting there, and it always makes me think of these armies in the 1800s and back, mostly. He had them sitting there for like a year or two. 100,000 dudes in a town, just sitting around. Sometimes he'd train them up to do this. Sometimes we're building that. And I'm like, that's kind of wild. It's wild to me sometimes how much time they waste. To me, a year seems like a really long time. Maybe that's a modern thing. But I'm like, why would I sit around for a year when you could, build a boat, go across the water, make it happen? Why are you waiting? You know what I mean? It's always wild to me. But I guess some of that is maybe modern times. I can get so many places so quick that the time in between doesn't feel like time versus them who had to walk it. You'd live the time in between, so to speak. I don't know. But it's always wild to me how they'll just camp up someplace and just wait around doing nothing. It's always kind of crazy. The state of these ships, it's the 1800s. I think the author says that steam power was available, but no one's really using it yet, which is kind of wild to me. Side note, it's wild that somebody could have fought in Waterloo and lived to see World War I. It's kind of trippy to me. In any case, there's a lot to do about the state of these wooden boats, right? Every navy, they're wood, they're rotting. They'll rot away. The tar will wear off, it's salt water. But the British have to have their boats out there because at any time Napoleon could start sending 100,000 troops and then we're all foobar. But the Navy's like, I can't stay out here forever. But they just sort of make do. They're patching things along the way. They're rickety as all get out. But they're there, and their presence is keeping Napoleon out. I kind of wonder if he hadn't just yeeted his ships at them. Don't overthink it. Just send your ships in one way. Send the army a different way. If the army just makes it. I don't know. He didn't think it through very well. He didn't understand the water. In any case, our author does do a good service to this, where we talk about you run out of water, you run out of food, the boat's breaking apart. Carpenters are constantly having to nail tin patches, or they'll have like big cork patches, I don't know, that they shove in. They had them ready. And they'd use them when the battle started as well. It's very cool. That part. I do like that part because it's interesting. It's sort of first-hand information you didn't know. We then get a look into politics. Some of the politics of England, some of the politics of France, how these affect things. The British are always hilarious in their politics to me. You have a massive problem, and then you have Parliament who's like, nah, I'm not going to spend money on that because we don't have money for that. But, the Navy needs to do its job. And the Navy's like, can I really get some money to refit this ship so I can shoot some? Nah, it's still floating. You're all right. It just gets wild to me. I always wait till the last second to do something, and then it always sort of works out for Britain. It's kind of strange. On the other side, France is in the middle of a revolution, right? So they had a massive revolution. Again, this part's not in the book. I just know this. They had a massive revolution, and then Napoleon's now emperor. So we have this quasi-situation where some of them don't like that he's emperor. Some of them don't like that they killed the other king and want the royalty reestablished, but not Napoleon. And then, like, everyone's afraid maybe Napoleon's too popular, I can't do anything to him. Right? And you're like, well, that's fine. Then we get back to the book. That ends up affecting his navy. Because they're such revolutionaries, they get a fervor to themselves. And so many of our Navy, our French Navy guys, our officers, admirals, and whatnot, were the upper class. So a lot of them didn't survive the revolution. There were mock trials. I say mock because the outcome's pretty much guaranteed. Aren't you rich? Haven't you always been rich? Doesn't that mean you stole from the people? Off with his head, this kind of thing. Guillotine was putting in work, people. So here's Napoleon, and now he needs a navy to get across to England to win the war, but he has no experienced officers because we killed them all in the revolution. I'm like, oh my goodness. You don't kill your naval officers. Who's going to run the boat? Well, who they got to run the boat is a bunch of revolutionaries who don't know what they're doing. Which made their admirals chicken to go out and, get in the mix. It was a hot mess on the French side. I'm going to be honest. This thing never had a chance. This part was wild. They would have gangs, work gangs, I think they sort of called them. And they'd land in a town, I don't know, any town, and they would press men into service. I'm like, what does that mean? It means if you went to a bar and you're just sitting there eating, some shrimp, watching the game, and then the Navy walked in and says, you're coming with me. And I'm like, I'm not, I'm eating. And they get like a gun and it's like, I'll shoot you in the face if you don't put the shrimp down and come on. They just go into town and grab guys, throw them on the boat and put them to work. What does that mean? Swabbing the deck, running ropes, hoisting sails, this kind of situation. Full on. They had Brazilians, Jamaicans. They had French people, Austrians, Norwegians. They had Americans that they just snatch up, chuck on their boats. And so you're like, I'm in this hot, terrible boat. I'm not eating good food. What are we talking about? Sea biscuits with weevils in them. We're not having fun. Officers eat good. I'm not eating fruit down here. It's horribly hot and sweaty. And I'm sailing towards a fight I don't want to be in, where they're going to be shooting cannonballs. Talk about a bad few months of your life. I was just chilling in Cadiz, Spain, or, taking in the sights. Now I'm stuck on this stupid boat. Hilarious. Both sides sort of did this. But the British did it more. And I'm like, what can you do? You don't want to get shot in the face. At one point, an American, And I'm like, bro, I just fought the Revolutionary War. I don't really like you people. Why are you making me fight these people? So the Americans aren't really happy about the situation to begin with. They get an American. He YOLO's out. I'm abandoning my post. Forget this stupid boat. Well, they catch him. The punishment for abandoning your post in the Navy is they hang you. But then they're like, this one's a particular situation because they call it the King's Bounty, meaning you've taken some good from England, so you kind of owe England a little. I guess that works for a British citizen, but they're like, bro, he's an American. He's never been to anything British. He don't know anything about British. So we might not want to kill him for abandoning his post. Plus, it might make America really mad. Bad for foreign relations. I'm like, this is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. Also, has got to suck. I'm just flat out. Top 10 worst crap ever. Living your life and you get chucked on a boat so that, I don't know, I can shoot a gun while the dudes are shooting guns at me. I'm not having fun. I'd be happier getting pressed into the army than having cannonball shot at me. Well, I guess that wouldn't help either, right? The army had cannonball shot at him too. I'm like, F that. I'm running. I already did that. Okay. He talks about the blockade a lot, which is obviously they literally lined ships up. So if you're just far enough out into the ocean, the French can see you. They can see your ships. They just can't get to you because you're out of cannon range. But you're just sitting there letting them know, like, if your ships come out, I'm going to blow them up. So don't come out. They tried some attacks in there. They didn't really work. But an interesting side note is that they had an American who was working on submarine technology back in 1806, 1812ish, whatever this era was. Which I'm like, that's pretty interesting. He was also working on torpedoes. Now you had to like row the bomb over there, and then sort of some kind of situation you send it down. The boats weren't fast, so that worked. It wasn't like ours where you like hit it the water and it goes. It wasn't that yet, but the idea of some kind of water-based delivery of an explosion was alive at this time. He got some money from the British to develop one. The first one was kind of a dud, but the second one, they said they sent it in. They sent it in, and when it blew up, they said it lifted the boat out of the water. Right before it broke it. The admirals there were not happy about this, and I'm like, I thought that was kind of wild. You would think, again, I've grown up in sort of a modern America, a modern Army Navy, where whatever's the best to win the fight is just what you use. We don't worry so much about displacing a general or displacing an admiral. This is sort of new in world history. Because back in the day, you were a figurehead. You had political power, you had sway. And to varying degrees in various countries, right? There's a big deal about this in World War II. In any case, these are very important admirals. If they say to the parliament, it's a dumb idea, it's just going to die, right? And it's not about, to them, what they didn't like, because they imagined not using torpedoes to win a fight. They imagined torpedoes used against them. And so rather than that, they're like, let's just not introduce it and keep fighting the way we've been fighting. Can you imagine that? Not taking a technological advantage for personal reasons? It's kind of wild. But when you think of the 1800s, and even in this battle, there was a lot of gentlemanly behavior. One guy, like, you put a flag up. Say, I'm fighting you. When you take too much damage, you pull the flag down, you put up a white flag. Like, I'm done. I've taken enough. Well, once they didn't see the flag, they're like, "Oh, he's given up. Don't shoot him anymore." All right, go get his surrender. So the guy and a few Marines, British Marines, rowed over to the boat, got hoisted up. They're like, "What do you want?" I'm hoist him up, see what he wants. We're here to accept your surrender. The guy's like, my mistake. I'm not surrendering. It was too tattered, so I was going to put another flag up. So we're not surrendering. I'm like, oh crap. And you're like, did they just capture those guys? I'm like, no. They just sent them back in their boat to the other side. And then after a few more volleys, then they surrender. It's very odd, the 1800s, about the honor and this kind of thing. So I can see where these admirals would think sort of it's unhonorable to not give your opponent the chance to sort of lay some licks in on you. I'm like, what a strange world. He said that Beethoven wrote a symphony for Napoleon. I had no idea. I had no idea they were even sort of alive at the same time. It's kind of trippy to me. Beethoven got mad at him, so changed the name. It said torpedoes. The British, at some point, didn't want any help going to Napoleon. But Napoleon was owed certain things from other countries, right? Or they didn't want to start a fight with them. So they'd be like, I owe you money, but the British are mad if I send you money. Can I send you like sugar instead? And Napoleon's like, yeah, it seems fine. Somebody's got to eat sugar. Well, the British took that as, a hostile act because they had this blockade and they're volunteering people for their navy, this kind of thing. So they find one of these Spanish ships. They demand to be let on. The guy's like, F off. They blow it up, kill like 200 people, and then Spain's mad, so they get in the war. I didn't know that's why Spain got in the war. In the course of this battle, and I think it's hard to say. It's hard to say if they were cowards or if that's just how the Spanish saw it. I don't know. In any case, no one likes to take a loss. So if I can blame it on someone else, I will. So in the course of this battle, the Spaniards didn't really think the French covered themselves in glory, if you know what I mean. I think they thought they were kind of chickens. And as such, they sort of began to be disgruntled with Napoleon. Which, again, not in this book now, it's sort of stuff that I know. Which is what led Napoleon to think they might come to war with me, so I have to go to war with them sooner, and he went into war with Spain. He's warring a lot of people. And I got to think that this sort of maybe started the overextending of Napoleon, which I didn't know it may have come down to this battle. So this battle was very crucial for world history, not just for British naval superiority for the next 100 years, but for world history. Because let's say Spain gets involved for this British reason, and then Napoleon's like, I'd like you to send your fleet against the British in any way you can. And then the Spanish just enact their own sort of style of warfare against them. Then sort of Britain's fighting a two-front naval war, so to speak. That might have drawn enough. In any case, let's say England would still hold out. The blockade still wins out. If Napoleon had never sent 100,000 plus men into Spain and just had that much more of a reserve, then maybe he doesn't lose in Russia, winter notwithstanding, because you, with extra men, I can make extra food, make extra supplies, keep my supply chain better defended, and with warm clothes, you just survive the winter, right? So then what if he takes Russia, and then he has endless supplies, because the Russians have serfs. Maybe he frees the serfs. Who knows what the world looks like? If Russia, 100 years earlier than World War I even, did not have serfdom. Maybe they're never communistic. Whole different world we're looking at. You know what I mean? We might not have had a second World War because the Russians wouldn't have lost so bad in the First World War. A lot of stuff could have happened just because of this one boat carrying sugar. We get to Lord I think his name's Lord Horatio Nelson, about halfway through the book. In this section, or moving forward, he gives you tidbits of other stuff that have happened in Lord Nelson's life and sort of in recent history. He had fought the other French Admiral Villeneuve around the Nile River. I'm like, if you'd have given me more Nelson, I think I'd have had more of a grasp on what was happening on the water, and you could have cut out Napoleon, and it would have been a much tighter story. But he doesn't. Again, that's why it's a 2 out of 5, people. There are other histories I'm pretty sure you could read. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know another one on Trafalgar. But I'll find it. I'll find it, or, recommend it in the comments. In any case, we get to Lord Nelson, and you can kind of see why he's famous. Let me see. He was 46 years old, blind in one eye. He lost an arm in a battle, had reoccurring pain from a stomach wound, an old one. He had hernia, reoccurring pain from a head wound he had also sustained, and a toothache. I mean, the man was falling apart. Why he was still out there, I have no idea. He was kind of crazy. They made a lot of money being out there. You would actually capture ships, get a chunk of what they're worth, and it's like he does a good job on this. Where he relates. If you're an officer, your share of a captured ship could get you a nice house. If you're a crew member and they capture a ship, you might get enough money to get a lease on a bar. This is sort of the levels. An admiral's cut would get an estate, not just a house, but a big land mass. So there's all these options. So a lot of people were out there for money, and that was sort of Nelson's reason. But he was also very patriotic. But I just thought it was wild that I'm like, you already took a cannonball already took off your arm and you survived and you're just still an admiral? You're out of your mind. We get a good cat and mouse between Villeneuve and Nelson, where Villeneuve got orders to go from sort of the bottom part of Spain, meet up with the Spanish, come up to where Napoleon is, drive the British away so that he can get his soldiers across. And so there's a cat and mouse between him and Napoleon as to try and find him on these, thousands of miles of coastland and ocean. It's a fun mind game I always get when I read anything about the Navy. The distances are so huge, and and your boat's so slower than even in modern times. But it's still so much distance to cover that you have to think where he might be when you're near him. Right? So, I think he's going left. So if I come this way, I'll meet him about there, and then we can fight. But then if he outthinks you, you just go this way, and he goes like that. Right? A lot of this kind of thing. It's very fun. And along with this, Navy does this more than Army, more than land-based stuff, where coincidences happen, right? It's nighttime. If it had been a few hours earlier, they'd have seen each other, but they just pass each other without knowing, or accidentally run into someone, and then we have a big fight. This kind of thing. Villeneuve's trying to head out, and so is another batch of French. I don't remember. In any case, they would have been on his side. But neither of them have hoisted up their flag to say, I'm French or I'm Spanish. So they see each other and they both think, oh my God, that's Nelson. I know he's in these waters somewhere. And they both sort of go the other way, go the other way from each other, right? Whereas if he'd have paired up then, he could have overrun a much weaker force. A lot of what ifs. Didn't happen. Nelson did guess right. He guessed through what his enemy would do, positioned his people accordingly. Now, Nelson's plan is pretty genius. There's a few genius things here that I didn't know. One, they had telegram stations. Now, when I read Telegram, I'm thinking, you know, this kind of thing. I'm like, I didn't think that existed in 1806. It didn't. What they did is they would build a tower and keep it within, I guess, telescope, like one of these telescope range of another tower. And then you flash some lights, like a candle or however you want to, a mirror in the sun, however you want to make a signal. And you do the sort of the code and you send a message. And then it gets relayed from that one to another and another. And so in this way, I can send a message from one side of England to the other. Napoleon would do the same. He could send messages all over France with these. And I'm like, that's kind of genius. Also, it affects how I read the story. Because, if you're reading an old book, they don't have a telephone in the Old West. So I have to get on my horse and run all the way over there and say, so-and-so needs the penicillin or whatever, and then ride them all the way back and save little Timmy. But if I know there's a phone, I know, why didn't he just call someone? And once he does, it changes the timeline of what's going to happen when. So it's the 1800s, and we have muskets, and we have cannonballs, but we also have this sort of like a phone system, this quick communication system. And I'm like, that changes a lot of things. I can know where someone is in a relatively quick, short amount of time. Now, can I get there and do something about it? It's a different story. Napoleon was able to move his troops at a very high rate of speed. In what took months for some, he took maybe 1 month. That's rapid speed. And I'm like, I could start to understand how he could be effective. Information makes you very effective in war. And it was a very cool little tidbit that I hadn't known. And I didn't know it was on both sides, the British and the French. Well, if you take this idea, here's what Nelson did. His plan was, you're going to have this big, broad, all the ships usually line up like this, then they line up, and then we sort of rail at each other and we fight. That works unless you're outnumbered. So his plan was, when they line up this way, I'm going to line up like this with, I guess, like 15 ships here and 18 ships there. And we're going to go straight in. And we're going to cut this in 3. Right? So once we're in on them, all our guns just shoot out. Right? And we'll cut them to smithereens. They said it was a revolutionary idea. No one had ever tried this. I'm like, that's genius. But to set it up, I have to bait them out of the harbor. If they see a bunch of ships, they're like, F that, I'm not fighting those guys. I'll just sit in harbor, and then my ship will rot away. I can only stay out here so long. So he put a smattering of ships out. And then he would have a relay system of ships. So this one's just in visual range of that one. Maybe it's 50 miles. And then that one's 50 miles. And so by the time his main forces hidden beyond the visual range. And when these see something, they'll put up a flag, it'll get transferred, then they'll start sailing in. So by the time they come out, boom, I caught you. It's exactly what he does. But I love the idea of that relay communication system. I had no idea that they did it this way. It's very smart, simple, but effective. Hold on. What's the guy's name? I love this little tidbit. A Lieutenant William Cumby was the first one to see it. The signal that they're coming out of the harbor. They would have been waiting a long time for this. And it seems small, but the British do a great job of this, seemingly more than anyone, where you'll snag this little moment to get yourself into history, kind of, so to speak. Right? Because you're like, I did this. I'm like, well, I'm the one who brought him his watch. And if he didn't know the time, we'd have lost the war. And then the guy goes, he did bring me the watch. And if I had thought it was 12 instead of 1, we would have lost the war. And boom, they brought you in history. So that on the one hand, they're trying, right? I'm trying to do a thing that gets me in history. And then on the other hand, everyone's remembering, right? But I'm assuming some people tried to cheat, but it didn't seem like there was much cheating going on. It was a race, but no, it was like, well, if you didn't see it, you didn't see it. I'm not going to lie for you to get you in the history books. If anything, I'll get in the history books for telling the truth about this liar who tried to lie his way into the history books. So funny. What happened? Oh, we have our author's writing. And in our cut there, he would give quotes of other people's letters. A lot of letters written about this from various people on board. Officers, crewmen, whatever. And I hate to say it, but some of the writing is... The quotes are better writing than the book. If that makes sense. And I'm like, that's kind of it just is what it is. The people writing then did a better job writing than the book you're reading. And it's not... Where did I write this? It's not ideal. I could have sworn I wrote this thing down. Bugger. Okay, anyway, let's move on. I just put that in there. What else happened here? Jane Austen's brother was on one of the ships. I thought that was really cool. And so they said she mentions it in Mansfield Park. So I'm like, I got to read Mansfield Park now at some point. See how that ended out. There are, and one of them writes one of these letters, and he writes pretty well for a kid. But there are children and women on board. I guess I can understand women. In my head, I heard somewhere women on board are bad luck, probably from a movie. So I didn't think they put women on board. But apparently one of them snuck on as a pretending to be a man. Others got on. Who knows what kind of way they managed to get on. I do not know. I know one lady, Jeanette, I think went on because she wouldn't let her leave her husband. So her husband got pressed into service, and I guess she went along with them. But they're children too. One's 12 years old. One's 12 years old. And I'm like, who brings a 12-year-old when cannons are going to get shot around them? They didn't just bring them. They sent them to work. They would run powder around. They called them powder monkeys. They'd usually get the women and the young boys to get the powder and run it up to the gun. And then run back for more powder. Which means at any point this kid could get his head taken off by a cannonball. There's the treatment admirals get is hilarious to me. Again, I grew up with what I grew up with. So an idea of admirals acting a kind of a way just doesn't. It's not in my head. We have you serve in the army and then you're out. You serve in the navy and then you're out. I don't like my orders, then quit. I don't want to hear about this mess. But these people, one of them, okay, they bring news by little fast ships. So in some of the news, he'd literally bring the newspaper. And so the admiral opens it up and he's reading about himself like, oh my God, they're bad-mouthing me. And then he's like, he wants to get back and like set the record straight, but then he can't leave. Or, well, next time I fight, I'm going to do it this. He'll fight more openly just to drain away that idea or something. I'm like, what is this? There was one. They thought he was a coward or something, so they want to bring him back and court-martial him. And he's like, that's kind of jacked up. And he's like, Lord Nelson, I need all my officers to come with me because they're going to tell the right story. And he's like, nah, I can't do all that. I need the dudes. And he's like, well, I demand to take my ship back. And I'm like, I'm sitting here about to have a war, and you want to take like 56 cannons away from me, sail back to England to complain about your court martial? I'd have been like, F that, bro. One, I'm not sending you back till this fight's done. And two, I'm certainly not sending you with your own boat. But Lord Nelson's like, well, I don't see a reason. I can't really send him without a boat. It's due his rank. It's due his rank. So this man left with a huge battleship to go back for his left. We were down a boat. The British were down a boat. I'm like, that's wild to me. Just the sort of the mentality, the autonomy of some of these admirals is just hilarious to me. He took a ship. He took a ship and left. I was mentioning the carpenters. I didn't know carpenters were this essential in a firefight on a ship. Um, when the cannons start going off, there'll be holes, right? And so he'll come up with a cork, shove it in there, break it off to sort of make sure more water doesn't get in or whatever. Or they'd come with a sheet of tin and nail it down. Or I'm like, I had no idea. Can you imagine? I'm like, I'm not trying to be that kind of carpenter. I'm fine making a desk or a table. I don't want to be on a boat getting shot at with cannons, though. That's kind of messed up. He does present a lot of these giga chads, which is every dude in the 1800s apparently, like every single one of them, and it's in multiple spots. And they almost took pride in this, of being just as much giga chad as humanly possible. So the boats are at war, and the officers will just pace around on deck or calmly walk around the boat, tell the guys, "Good on you with the guns," or something like this, right? Cannon flying all around, musket fire going ham. Everyone's trying to shoot everyone, literally. One guy started biting it. He was eating an apple, just casually, walking around the ship with people dropping dead around him. And the eyewitness is like, I swear he was as casual during the fight as afterwards. Still munching on an apple. Just put more powder in there. This kind of thing. We had one guy, and they'd be standing there, like Lord Nelson's standing there, and he's talking to these other guys are talking, and this guy takes a cannon to the head, dies. It spins him around. He falls dead on the ground, and then Lord Nelson's like, "Is that so and so?" Ah, tough luck about that. Such a good officer. And the other guy's like, "Yeah, he was." So they made a point to not show fear at all whatsoever. And you say some of that's for show, that they really felt it. But I can see where society drums itself up, right? Where cowards are supplanted and bravery just begets bravery. And before you know it, you do have a generation of crazy people who are legitimately not afraid. It's kind of gruesome, but one guy took a musket ball to the chest or something, right? And he's bleeding horribly. Grazed his head. I don't know where it was. I can't imagine you take a musket ball anywhere and it's good. He purposely told the doctor, "Nah, I'm waiting at the back of the line where I showed up. You go ahead and get them done first." Just bleeding out till the doctor got to him. One guy had his arm somehow mangled horribly by a cannonball or something. Also waits at the back of the line, and while he's waiting, he's cutting off ragged bits to make it easier for the amputation while singing some kind of British victory song or some crap. I'm like, what the crap is these guys about? What the actual crap? A lot of this. The ships were slow, okay, and they're sailboats. So if there's a gust of wind, you're going fast. And if the wind dies, you're not going fast. So at one point, you could have, what does it say? 17,000 people staring at each other, going 1 mile an hour towards each other. And the moment we're within 50 yards, I'm going to shoot you with a cannonball. Can you imagine just like walking slowly to someone across the room, knowing you're going to slap them as hard as possible when you get there, and then they're going to slap you back, and then you're going to fist fight each other? And that before that happens, you take 30 minutes to walk across the room before you do this? Can you imagine this? Absolutely wild. And again, because of the 1800s, they said everyone, and they made a point of this, which I can't say they were lying. It goes both sides as well, the French and the British. And you got to imagine these are some people who didn't even want to be in this fight. They said everyone was just quiet, calm, knowing what's going to happen, but you just accept it. Can't get off the boat, can't swim to shore. My only survival's this boat, and dudes are about to shoot massive cannonballs into it. They would put up netting somewhere. They would fight without with their shirts off, or I think with one of them said they had silk stockings. The men wore silk stockings, so that when cannonball hit wood and splinters went shooting out. One, if you had silk, like the Mongolians, they have silk under their armor, so that when you could pull on that silk, and the wound is a lot cleaner because the silk won't cut. You won't cut through the silk. Same with the splinters. The silk and all goes in, and it's a cleaner wound. But the guys didn't want a dirty shirt on them because what is it? Sepsis was going to kill a bunch of people afterwards from infection. And I'm like, this just sounds horrible. He goes into pretty solid detail about what happens when cannonballs meet cannonballs. And again, you got to remember it's the 1800s. So, both sides were afraid of fire. So at one point, they were so close to each other that when the British would fire across, they'd then chuck buckets of water across so that it doesn't start that boat on fire. And then, of course, get theirs on fire after the fact. Which I thought was kind of crazy. I'm like, I just shot at you, but I don't want you to burn. But then I don't want me to burn. But I'm also trying to steal the ship to get paid and get a country villa. A lot of weird stuff happening in this fight, other than just trying to win. But we do talk in a good, solid description of, cannonballs taking heads off, cannonballs taking arms off. Brutal way to fight. Things were bouncing around. I think one cannonball, they said, took out like 4 Marines at once. Just insta dead. There were guts everywhere, blood everywhere. The British, as soon as you died, they'd chuck you overboard. One guy, a cannonball hit one guy, blew his head off. That head hit another guy in the head. It's a skull. So it knocked him out. They then think he's dead, so they pick him up to chuck him out the hole. And then at the end, he starts kicking. It's like, oh, hold up. So they haul him back in. And he continues the fight. I can't imagine. There was no wind. It wasn't windy, so the smoke stayed. So I don't know how many hundreds of cannon going off. Now I can't see anything. No one can hear because cannons just went off. I can't see, I can't hear. Fire again. We're just bombing. I'm okay. Next thing I know, my friend's head's coming off because a cannonball went through it. I'm like, what the crap is this mess? They were absolutely crazy. Stood there, took it though. They didn't say people abandoned their posts or ran and hid. It'd be shameful. I'm like, bro, I'll take that shame all day. And twice on Sunday. Put my chicken butt on the shore where no one's shooting a cannonball at me. Y'all are crazy. I don't know how many women were on board. One, they said they called her, she was big. So I'm assuming she might have been like 6 feet tall. I know there was another story I read where this lady was 6 feet tall, Irish. She was a fireman, a police officer. That's all kind of craziness. So this lady was big and strong, and she was able to she was carrying men to the medic, this kind of thing. So I don't know how many women were on board. We didn't really track it, but the Jeanette lady was on board because she wanted to be with her husband. At some point, she was locked under with the cannons. The thing started on fire. No one could hear her because, again, the cannons had been going off. But the ship might be going down. So rather than, sink with the ship, she climbs out of the ship, hauls her way around to the rudder, hangs on by a chain, but then pieces start melting off the ship, so she's sort of burnt by liquid brass. I'm like, that sounds terrible. So eventually she's like, I can't stay here. I'm not going to die like this. She takes off all her clothes, jumps in the water. She tries to swim to a boat, but that boat, I guess it was too full. They didn't want her. So another group wanted her. So she was quickly given some pants and a jacket. Then hauled on board. She can't find her husband. That officer sees her and is like taking pity on her. Here's this lady. So he puts her up in his room with some sectioned off area. So she's eating good. She's worried about her husband, but no one can be bothered with that right now. A few days later, when they can bother with it, and she's doing better, in good spirits, she finds her husband. But then she's like, I can't accept your hospitality because my husband can't. To be inappropriate. And they're like, I understand. He says he missed her because she was nice. So now she's below deck with her husband. And then by the time they were all let offshore in Cadiz after the fact, everyone below decks was sad to see her go. Even the British were like, she was such a nice lady. I'm like, what kind of crazy life is this lady leading? I'm like, I've heard of ladies, following the boyfriend to Miami or some mess like this. I ain't never heard of many following their husbands onto a battleship to get cannonballs shot at them. Hilarious. And then he mentions about this dog. I got to tell you this because it was too funny. It's not funny, but I was laughing. Battle's about to start, right? We're sailing right towards the enemy. It's going to be this big bloody mess. And so they're like, we got to go faster. Let's chuck off some of the stuff we don't need. Here's this heavy thing. Here's this basket of dumb stuff. Here's this table. Whatever. They're chucking stuff off. The crew, for whatever reason, I have no idea. Maybe this dog was annoying. I don't know the type of dog. They is like, we're going to chuck the officer's dog overboard. It's dead weight. And they chucked the dog overboard. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. You just killed that dog. They didn't kill the dog. There's some kind of rigging or something. When they threw him overboard, he landed on that. Okay? So I'm like, this dog is like living his life. Gets chucked overboard. It's like, what the crap is now? I'm stuck here, right? Because I can't jump in the ocean. So he's just sitting there. The battle starts. Cannonballs just flying. People dying. Body parts everywhere. The dog doesn't get hit. The dog doesn't get hit. They find the dog after the battle, haul him back onto the ship. They say he's much subdued. I'm just imagining this dog. He's the doggo. He's like, we're good, right? We're good, bro. We're on the boat. We're good. What's going on? We're going for a trip? You're throwing me overboard? I'm stuck here, bro. What is this? Next thing you know, cannons are going. Like, ah, ah, ah. Yeah, he's terrified. There's sounds. There's explosions. Can you imagine being this dog? He's like, what are these crazy people doing? And then you're just like shell-shocked. Right? You're back on board, and you're like, bro, I'm not going to say anything. Never going to bark again. Go ahead, you put me on the deck. I'll eat my kibble. No problem, bro. No barking. I won't keep anyone up. How are you gentlemen doing? These people are crazy. One more slip up, who knows what they'll do. Can you imagine what went through this doggo's head? Lived through the whole battle. Much subdued, they wrote. The dog was much subdued. I'm like, I bet he was much subdued. God dang it, that's so funny. I don't even understand, though. Why would you do it? It's funny. I'm laughing. They weren't laughing. A lot of heads were blown off, but it's still kind of funny. It's still kind of funny. Poor doggo. For the honor, just so you understand, one guy, some of them left because they're like, look, this is a losing fight. But another guy's like, I'm going to back in the fight. He took his ship in and he just got roasted. And then he gave up. Another guy's like, I have to fight, but I'm going to lose. whatever. So he shoots 3 shots near the enemy to get them to shoot at him. He wants to take a volley, then surrender so he's not a chump, a pansy. No one will say he's a pansy. He shot. The other British captain goes, he's about to give up. Don't, he goes, don't hurt the fellow. Send one across the bow. So they just aim one shot that buzzed them, and then he tip of the hat and they surrender. Just so that everyone saves face, so no one can say he was a chicken. I'm like, I stood there. I was going to take any hit they wanted to give me. They just didn't do it. And they're like, I saw he was willing to take any shot, but out of deference to the man's courage, there's no need for needless bloodshed. And they just gave up the boat. A lot of this was happening. Kind of hilarious, the 1800s. So if you read 1800 stories, remember that. And it was the dudes running the guns, the dudes underneath, these are normal people. These aren't officers. They weren't raised rich. Just, shanghaied in a bar. So even they had this sort of sense of honor. It was very pervasive in the time. So remember that when you're reading stories. In the 1800s. All right. I think I'm going to end sort of on the doggo. All right. Let me see how long that was. It's long enough. Man, I blabbed too much. All right. Ad time. It seems schizophrenic, sort of what I was saying, I suppose. But this is how he does the story. He lets a lot of side facts come in that don't need to be in this book. Some are funny. Some are interesting on their own. But on the whole, they don't make for a good book. So you can skip this one. Don't read it. I read it. So you don't have to. He winds it down, I guess, decent enough. Bodies rolling up on shore, this and that, this kind of thing. But it doesn't, because it doesn't have a good direction, it can't have a decent ending. The ending being, right, that, Lord Nelson won naval superiority for the British for 100 years. But we didn't focus enough on Nelson for a book about Trafalgar. At least not in my opinion, which is the only one that matters. Look, if you read this book, you'll agree with me. You'll agree that it was unnecessary. Okay? It's just the way it is. You'll say, this wasn't good, and it should have been better. And you will be right. You will also have wasted your time. All right, people. That doggo. All right, people. I will talk to all of you next week.